There are certain things that can really move the needle forward for women who are either in late perimenopause, getting ready to transition to menopause, or for women who've already made this transition into what some refer to as postmenopause. I've talked about a few of these things on here on the podcast, such as intermittent fasting, or time restricted eating. That is one way that we can move the needle forward as far as our health and fitness goals are concerned, whether it's to lose body fat, scale weight and body fat, or perhaps you're not needing to lose weight, but you're just wanting to be healthier overall. You're wanting to have a healthy cardiovascular system. You're wanting to have a healthy brain, a healthy gut. These are little things that have been linked to longevity. Another one is exercise. I talk a lot on here about zone two exercise being something that moves the needle forward for longevity, for overall health, because we need to look at more than just scale weight, bringing down body fat. We have to start to view things from a long perspective. I had a conversation with another coach the other day, and we were talking about how women, well, really all human beings, I think, have this tendency. We really don't want to look ahead and think about the years where we're going to be older. We don't want to think about being in our 70s or 80s, or even I'm in my 60s, but for some of you listening who are in your 40s or 50s, you don't want to think about your 60s. And I get it. It just seems like a kind of a downer to think about growing older. But I'm going to argue that it is necessary to look ahead at where you want to be in 10, 20, 30 years, whatever the case may be, and then decide where you're at now and what you need to do to make that happen. So, for example, for me, I want to keep functioning as well as I can. And when I say function, I mean being able to move, climb stairs, pick things up. I want to feel good. I want my heart to be healthy. I want to have good cognition and memory and recall. I want my brain to be healthy. I don't want to lose my cognition. So I am focused on all the things that I can do now to make that a reality as I move forward. And I am really forced at 61 to be a realist. I can't pretend that I'm, 20 forever, 30 forever, 40 forever, 50 forever. Those days are kind of gone. I have to be a realist here. So, what I'm going to share with you is something today. It may not seem very exciting or sexy, but I'm going to be honest, this will help you move the needle forward for your health, particularly if you are in menopause or at the door of menopause. Hi, my name is Carol Cavino, and I'm an online fitness and health coach for women over the age of 40 who are struggling with perimenopausal and menopausal hormonal symptoms. I help these ladies to lose the body fat for good and to strengthen and tone their bodies. So let's get into today's content. I'm going to bring up some notes and dive right in. Now, we know that we have these fluctuations in hormones that occur in perimenopause. Perimenopause has been described as reverse puberty. And that is a great way to put it because you're basically backing out. Puberty, you're headed in. And when you reach the point of perimenopause, things are starting to back out. So, in other words, some of the hormones are winding down. The ovaries are starting to sort of check out, and maybe you skip an ovulation cycle. I was just speaking with a friend today who is talking about only getting a period, and not just every other month, but every 2 months. So it's getting further and further apart. And so some months she's ovulating, some months she's not. The hormones are going up and down. So with these fluctuations, and in particular estrogen, what happens is you can start to get glucose spikes. And this begins in perimenopause. Typically, I'm going to say for most women in and around 45, it can occur sooner, it can occur later. Everybody's different. We're bio individuals. But for a lot of women, it's going to occur in and around that 45-year mark. And glucose spikes and crashes basically what we're talking about is your blood sugar. So you're eating something and you're getting this big spike, and then it's crashing back down the other side and you're exhausted. And the only way to really know this is to either wear a continuous glucose monitor, which is going to give you information in real time of what's happening. And then if you want maybe a more general, broader picture, things like looking at your hemoglobin A1C, insulin levels, your fasting glucose, that can all help. But keep in mind that it's a snapshot. You're just getting what's happening in that moment when you have those labs drawn, or it might be a 3-month average. I think the hemoglobin A1C is an average, but the monitor actually gives you real information. The one that I used is the NutriSense. Levels has one. I do not receive any kind of commission or anything. Those are just ones that I know that are very good. They're good companies. I had a great experience with NutriSense. You get to work with a registered dietitian if you choose. Believe the first month is free with that dietitian. So something that you might want to check out. But these fluctuations in perimenopause that lead to these spikes and crashes of blood sugar can be a precursor to insulin resistance. And as we've talked about here on the podcast, insulin resistance is where insulin is coming in to mop up the mess from these high blood sugar levels. But if this is occurring too often and you have insulin flooding in continually, what can happen is your body and brain cease to even recognize that it's there. I always give this analogy of the mailman coming to the door, knocking at your door, and you ask maybe through the door, yes, and they say, yeah, I have a package for you. And then you open up and he's like, never mind, I don't have a package for you. Well, if he continued to do that, you would cease to even recognize that as being valid. It's kind of like the old scenario of crying wolf too many times, somebody saying something happened that didn't happen. After a while, you're like, right, there's no package at the door. You're playing me for a fool. So when you've got this insulin going up, going up, going up, eventually what can happen is it's like the mailman at the door knocking, 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 and the brain and body are like, they're not even recognizing it. So in the case of type 2 diabetes, there's insulin, but the body's not recognizing it. It's behaving as if it's not there. And then that leads, of course, to people going down the road with medication and so many of these metabolic diseases that can follow, such as cardiovascular. Now they feel there's a link with Alzheimer's as well. So we don't want that to happen. And if you have a family history of diabetes type 2, cardiovascular problems, things like this, that doesn't have to be your reality, but it might mean that genetically you're more predisposed. So a few things can make this worse. Obviously, if somebody is not lifting weights, they're not exercising. Muscle is a sink for excess glucose. It can rinse that excess glucose through. So muscle is something, movement is something, taking a walk after you eat. These are all things that move the needle forward. And stay with me. I'm going to get to where we're going with this, and it'll make a lot more sense. And I'll be explaining how you can apply it. But we want to avoid that insulin resistance. We want to stay insulin sensitive as much as possible, as long as possible. That should be our goal. Because insulin resistance, as I mentioned, is a precursor to many metabolic and chronic diseases, which the World Health Organization now says is the major cause of death in not just America, but the world. So this is becoming even a worldwide problem. What we know is exercise can help with this problem, movement and lifting weights, of course, diet, but we're not going to really talk much about diet today. But there's something else that I don't discuss much that can be critical for your health. And I don't think I even realized it until I recently had an experience, which I'm going to share with you. It's a little vulnerable, but I'm going to go ahead and share it because I believe it might be helpful for someone listening. So, fiber, that's what we're going to talk about. I know, please do not turn off the podcast. When I listen to my favorite podcast, health podcast, and they start talking about fiber, I'm just so tempted to go, oh, I want to talk about weightlifting. I want to talk about nutrition. I want to talk about intermittent fasting. I don't want to talk about fiber. That doesn't sound very exciting. but stay with me. It's going to be worth it. Fiber reduces blood glucose, blood sugar spikes, and helps to stabilize your glucose levels. This is exactly what we want in perimenopause and menopause. So in menopause, it's common also for women to experience constipation. They start to have more gut and digestive issues. It just kind of comes along with the territory. Combination of aging, our current diet and lifestyle, and then the shifts in hormones and certain hormones declining can make this worse. It is common as women go into menopause, they start to experience this because estrogen and estrogen receptors in the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract, decline. Well, of course, they're going to decline. Estrogen's going down, the ovaries are checking out, the adrenals are trying to make some estrogen, but not doing a very good job of it. And we start to lose some of our receptors. And once we go through menopause, this really begins to accelerate. So when we lose these receptors and we lose the estrogen, the gastrointestinal tract can decline. As it does, it actually affects the muscles in the colon, something we don't want. So then this can lead to the constipation. We don't always receive the amount of fiber that our bodies need from our diet, and I do recommend supplementing because it can be awfully hard to get it all in, but we'll get to that in a few moments. So fiber helps you in many ways. So first of all, it's going to help you to burn fat and maintain a healthy weight. It has protective qualities, as I mentioned, against those high dysregulated blood glucose levels that lead to type 2 diabetes. Is protective with cardiovascular disease and coronary heart disease, and also can play a role in being protective against certain cancers, such as colon cancer. High fiber slows down stomach emptying, and it takes longer to move through the digestive tract than, say, if we drank apple juice, which hopefully we're not doing that, especially after last week's podcast. This allows you to feel fuller, and when you feel fuller and more satiated, you're going to eat less calories. Not that everything is about calories, but they do matter. The amount of energy that we expend and take in does matter. There's other things too that can matter even more, but we do have to look at that. So if you're more satiated, you're not going to be as tempted to binge on other foods. Fiber actually helps fat to move through the digestive system so that less is absorbed. Fiber also keeps blood sugar levels stable, which in turn allows for a steady amount of energy to the brain. You're going to hear me talk about this blood glucose over and over and over and over again. It's that important. It's key. So I'm going to be repeating myself a bit here. So when it's keeping those levels stable, the energy to the brain is also stable. You don't want those high highs and then crashing down the other side. When I wore my monitor, I saw it happen with me a few times, and you feel it. You can feel that crash and you can feel that shakiness, and it's just not a good feeling. It's not good for our bodies overall to be processing food in that manner. So we want to keep things as stable as we can. One study looked at 345 overweight and obese adults who were on a calorie restricted diet, and researchers found that higher fiber promoted weight loss for these individuals and greater consistency with the diet. Now, this is the caveat. All of this happened away from calorie counting and macro counting. So, in other words, it was independent of calorie counting and macro counting. The only thing they were really focused on was getting in this fiber. So, it wasn't looking at how many calories the individuals were eating or how much protein or any of that. It was concentrating on the fiber. And the individuals who were overweight or obese who um, consumed a higher fiber diet lost more weight. Now, I have to back up a little bit. They were on a calorie restricted diet, but that wasn't the focus, and they weren't counting calories, counting macros, looking at strictly calories. The focus was on the fiber. Studies have also indicated that fiber promotes steady glucose levels. Remember, I told you I was going to be repeating that by preventing those insulin spikes and crashes. that are associated with type 2 diabetes. The risk of type 2 diabetes can actually be reduced by 20 to 30% according to this research when fiber is increased to an adequate level. Fiber also stimulates insulin to suppress a hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hunger hormone. It is your stomach growling at you, telling you it's time to eat. The last thing you want is out of control ghrelin, because that's when we're going to just want to snack and binge and do all of those types of things. So fiber can help with that. The trillions of bacteria that inhabit the gut thrive on fiber, and these bacteria have an effect on the immune health and inflammation. So, what we know is that menopause does alter the gut microbiome, and this can lead to insulin resistance, which in turn leads to a lower metabolism. We don't want that. And fiber does this by helping to reduce the bad bacteria and supporting the good bacteria. If gut bacteria do not receive the fiber that they need, and this is a little gross, but I'm going to share it, they will actually eat away at the intestinal lining in order to get what they need, in order to feed themselves. And this causes gut permeability, leaky gut, and allows for this bad bacteria, the dangerous bacteria, to penetrate the colon wall, which we don't want. And fiber can really help in this area because it creates a thick mucus layer in the lining of the colon. So when we eat fiber, this is what's happening. It remains intact until it reaches the colon, where it is then fermented by bacteria and short chain fatty acids are produced. These short chain fatty acids are actually metabolic products that become an energy source for your colon. Pretty cool, huh? And they can reduce damage from toxins, they can lower the inflammation, support your immune system, and reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. So when women lose estrogen, they're in menopause, they are at a greater risk of their gut microbiome, the lining being compromised and not getting the benefit of these short chain fatty acids. They're at a greater risk of abnormal lipid, cholesterol levels, and heart disease. Something that a lot of people don't recognize, a lot of women don't recognize. And I know why, because of kind of what you heard over the decades. Oh, heart attacks happen to men. Men are more likely to have heart attacks. This is true until women reach typically in and around 45 is the mark they believe where this begins to shift. And you can see why. That's when the hormones are shifting. Then we too are at a very high risk. And it is, I believe, right now the number one killer of women. So there are three types of fiber. We'll go over this briefly and move on. Soluble fiber absorbs in water, and it basically is going to help you with your cholesterol levels to keep them stable and your blood sugar levels. Insoluble fiber remains whole. It doesn't absorb the water, but it helps with healthy stools and quicker waste elimination. And the third type is the fermentable fiber that's often called prebiotics. It supports healthy gut bacteria. Soluble fiber, not fire, can actually aid in the detoxification of the digestive tract and kill off bad bacteria such as candida, that overgrowth of yeast that is such a problem when women reach midlife. Insoluble fiber can bind with carcinogens, those agents that cause cancer, and other toxic chemicals that are formed when you digest food. And once it binds to that, it can eliminate that. That's part of that detox process. I'm going to do a separate podcast on the whole detox process. I actually spoke about this in conjunction with estrogen dominance, but I want to go over it in more detail. And it's more than I have time for today, and I really want to do it justice. So we are going to do that in a future episode very soon in the future. And I'm going to talk about how all of this comes together. You need to constantly be detoxing. Now, can you get rid of every single toxin by eating fiber? Absolutely not. That's ridiculous. Any more than sitting in a sauna every day would get rid of everything. It's just a tool in your toolbox to help your body with these detoxification processes. fiber does something with inflammation. It lowers it. So a major marker for inflammation, and you may have seen this on your lab work, is C-reactive protein. C-reactive protein, CRP. Get in the habit of looking at your own labs and getting copies of your labs. My CNP gives me copies of my lab. She first explains everything in detail. I ask the questions I need to ask. Then I get the copy of the lab work. I go home and I go over it numerous times. And I even do my own research. And then if I have further questions when I go back to her again, I ask them or can call and ask them as well if there's something I'm not clear about. But you need to have some knowledge around your lab work. No, you're not going to be able to read them like a doctor, but you can at least get a very clear idea of the markers that you need to be in charge of. We cannot outsource our health. As women, we need to stop outsourcing our health. Do we need our doctors? Yes. Are our doctors wonderful? Yes. But we need to stop handing everything over. We need to take some ownership of our own health, of our labs, what's going on inside our bodies. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to someone, male or female, and I've asked about labs, someone that I'm working with, okay, what's this marker, that one? And they really don't know. They do not know because they have relied on what their doctor told them in the office visit. They've not even really looked over the lab work themselves. Don't rely on that. Ever since I got autoimmune disease, you better bet I go over my labs with a fine-tooth comb. So low grade chronic inflammation actually begins in the gut, and it'll actually manifest oftentimes as IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and other such things. And I can look back and see that I had a lot of these issues through the late perimenopausal years from 45 to 50, 51 that I think set me up for autoimmune. Was it the sole contributor? No, but I think that it began in the gut. One study found that those with the highest fiber intake had a 63% lower risk of that elevated CRP. You do not want that elevated CRP. Recommended fiber by the US is 25 to 30 grams. That's generally, what's kind of a government recommendation. I personally, from my own experience with myself, clients, working with my nurse practitioner, all of the research that I do, 50 is the number that I believe is a better number. But I don't want you to go out and try to get 50 grams of fiber today. You will not like me at all. Your stomach will not like you or me. So take it slow. Increase it by 5 grams, maybe every other day or every third day. You have to kind of go by how you're feeling. For me, I had to take this super slow. For others, you might be able to press the gas pedal a little bit more. So just take it slow, maybe start with every third day, increasing it by 5 grams. Just kind of see how you do. If you need to do it weekly, you do it weekly. If you can do it every other day, you do it every other day. Some statistics have shown that women are only consuming 12 grams per day. So you figure the government amount is 25 to 30, they're doing 12. Men on average, I think it's about 15. It just depends on where you get your numbers from. 12 is awfully low. You want to get to that 50, as I mentioned. Give your digestive system a chance to adjust, go slow. You can get your fiber from non-starchy vegetables, nuts, seeds, wild rice, beans, quinoa, and berries. Now, the problem is some people can't handle the lectins. Some people can't handle beans. They can't do lentils. They can't do things like that. I will say if they're cooked in a pressure cooker, that is your best bet. That usually takes care of the problem. I rinse beans really well and then cook them in the pressure cooker, and I don't have problems ever since I do that. But once again, everyone is different. And so because this can be challenging, supplementing can be helpful. And there's a lot of different products out there. OptiFiber is one by Zymogen. That's OptiFiber by Zymogen, Xymogen. I believe you need a practitioner's prescription, even though it's not a medication. You need a practitioner to prescribe it for you in order to buy it. or you need to get it at your practitioner's office. And so that's something that you'll need to look into, or look into finding a similar product. JJ Virgin makes a good fiber. Cynthia Thurlow makes a good fiber that you can just add to your shake. So you want a good, clean fiber to add into your protein drink or wherever you're going to add that in for the day. So I'm going to go into a few more things, and then I'm going to tell my very vulnerable story on actually why I decided to do this podcast and talk about fiber. So looking at fiber, there are so many different things it can do. It's actually believed to help the pelvic floor, and that's because of the problems with the constipation. So if you're eating the fiber and that's everything's going along good, you're less likely to have those issues. A big reason why fiber is essential at this time of our lives in midlife and menopause and beyond is because of that pelvic floor health. Pelvic organ prolapse, that's, I mean, I don't want to get gross here, but that's where the organs like your uterus, bladder, or rectum can drop from their normal position into or out of the vagina. I know I'm putting in a lot, a lot of details. Hope the kids aren't tuning in here. And that can affect about 50% of women in menopause are at an increased risk for this. And like I said, constipation is a big part of that because that develops and then you add stress and the estrogen receptors are declining, estrogen's declining, and it affects the muscles of the colon. And of course, you're straining, you're under stress. This is making it worse. It feeds your gut microbiome. That was another benefit we spoke about. It protects your heart by managing and keeping those cholesterol levels very level, keeping them very stable. That was the word I was looking for. We talked about the blood sugar management, but something you might not have thought of is the hot flashes. When you're transitioning, you're right at that window where you're not quite into menopause, you start to get these rapid, you will start to get these hot flashes. And when I say rapid, I do mean rapid. They come out of nowhere, they're super intense, and they kind of just take over your entire body and you're in a cold sweat before you know it, or overnight this can happen too, the night sweats. So blood sugar is believed to be a big part of this, the blood sugar fluctuations that midlife women go through. And because fiber helps with this stabilization, it can help with this as well. So you can eat things, again, I mentioned a few of them, raspberries, broccolis, black beans, almonds, things like that, seeds and nuts, but supplementing can really help with this as well. So I'm going to go ahead and tell my somewhat embarrassing story. But this is why I do things like this. I feel that there is a lot of, actually, let me rephrase this. I feel like being secretive and being ashamed of the processes in our bodies, not wanting to talk about it, being embarrassed, being ashamed can actually make us sick. Because in order to address our health, we need to have all of the information. We need to not be embarrassed to ask these questions of our doctor. We need to not be embarrassed to share things with our girlfriends. We need to not be embarrassed to have some sense of openness. Now, of course, we want our privacy, yes. But when it comes to health, I saw this firsthand with my dad, not so much my mom, but with my dad. Things embarrassed him and he felt weak going to the doctor with things. And as a consequence, he lost his kidney function. He not completely, but he lost the kidney function in one kidney completely. And in the other kidney, about by the time of his death, it was only functioning less than 0.5%. I'm going to say a third of what it should be functioning, very low functioning. He never had to go on dialysis, and he actually did not pass away from kidney failure. But this all happened because he just let things go and go. And he was having these signs and symptoms, and he was very, very embarrassed. So he would not go to the doctor. And by the time he went, the damage was done. By the time he went, it was to the ER, and he was in an enormous amount of pain, and he would have died. Like he would have died if he had not gotten treatment. This had a profound effect on me watching this, and I see what happens when people are embarrassed to ask questions about their health. So that is why I will be vulnerable with mine. So, if you're over 50, you've probably had the joy of a colonoscopy by now. I'm not going to go into all of the reasons to have one. I'm not going to go into what the procedure is. Hey, you can Google that if you need to know it. But I'm just going to tell you that I've had three, and I actually had one at age 45, and that was that irritable bowel syndrome. I wound up in the emergency room in extreme pain, and so this was one of the many tests that were performed on me to try to figure out what was going wrong. And that's when I was diagnosed with the IBS, the irritable bowel syndrome. So that was my first one. And then from there, they said, you need to have them done every 5 to 7 years because we found polyps. And those are like little growths. They can turn into cancer. There's a couple of different kinds, but they can turn into cancer and into colon cancer. And so you want to remove them, you want to biopsy them. Most of the time, when they're small, when they're caught, they're simply removed and they are benign. They are not cancerous. So I had three of them at that time. This was not surprising to me because my diet was not the best and I was not taking care of my health like I should. I wasn't doing the things I should be doing with my diet. So later on, I, of course, cleaned up my diet, went on to do bodybuilding competitions, did my next colonoscopy, and I had no polyps at that time. So they're like, okay, you can go now 7 years. I think it was 8 years. So just recently had one done, and I actually went over because of everything that happened over the past 2 years, and it was very difficult to even get in to get a procedure. Then they got all backed up, so I had to wait a year. You get the gist. I'm sure you have things like that too. Trying to get an MRI or any kind of test like that is very challenging lately because the medical system got so backed up. So had it done, and lo and behold, I had three polyps again, and they had to be removed and they had to be biopsied. I was more worried this time because rather than being 40, whatever I was, 46 or whatever I was at the time, I don't recall. Actually, I think I was a little older than maybe 47, 48. So I wasn't as worried then because I was in my 40s and I thought, they're benign. This time around, it worried me, it scared me. Well, they were benign, they were removed. But the doctor went over the risk factors with me and sent them to me in my chart. I didn't have a single risk factor other than age, of course. Age is always a risk factor for all kinds of things, but the fiber. And that's what I traced it to. I wasn't eating enough fiber. Now, do I know conclusively that that caused the polyps? No, I don't know that. This is me suspecting that that was the problem. Getting enough fiber has always been an issue for me. I've had problems ever since I was diagnosed with autoimmune. I have problems with imbalances in my gut microbiome. I've had leaky gut, I've had pylorrhea, I've had the yeast, I've had these things. And I have had to go through treatment at times, work with my nurse practitioner to dial these things in. It's so much better. But because of all these problems, I had trouble eating vegetables. Every time I ate vegetables, I would be doubled up in pain. So then I began to avoid vegetables other than say, I don't know, I would have lettuce or green beans occasionally, which are full of lectins, which that wasn't the best thing to have. But I realized, you know what? I eat an awful lot of protein. I eat a healthy amount of fats and carbs. I have one salad maybe at night. I'm avoiding these vegetables just because I have this long history of pain every time I eat them. So now I've been on a mission to really put the right supplements into my regimen. And I'm not going to give you mine because I'm taking what I'm taking for me, and we can't just duplicate the same thing. I can't give you mine, you can't give me yours. We're all bio individuals. So I am looking at that. I do work with my nurse practitioner, and I am making sure my vegetables are well cooked, and I am incorporating them slowly back in and then supplementing with fiber. This is not an uncommon problem for women trying to get their fiber, trying to eat their veggies. And a lot of veggies don't have enough fiber. Like we think, okay, veggies and fiber, a lot of them don't have enough. We're not going to get to 50 grams. We'd have to sit there and, I don't know, eat a tub of broccoli, which we're not going to do. So supplementing can be very, very helpful. So I would encourage you to look into this. Talk with your healthcare professional. If you have not had a colonoscopy, I do recommend that you have one because those polyps are silent. They do not give any symptoms until they turn into cancer. It's a very silent killer. So just like taking care of our heart and our cardiovascular health, we have to look at everything and think about the fiber. Go back, listen to this episode, take a few notes. Let me know if this was helpful for you. You can send me a message on Instagram. My Instagram account is at Carol Covino Fitness. And I also have my YouTube up and going. That's at Carol Covino Fitness as well. So you can find me there. There's a link in the show notes. Now, before I begin to wrap up here, I want to let you know, and I've mentioned this before, I am writing a book. So I have just finished the second editorial process. It's off to the editor. And once she comes back with what she has, it's done. It's ready to move on to formatting, book cover, all of the exciting things. And it is most likely going to be released in early March, but I am putting together a launch team. I need your help. I need those of you that feel called to do so and enjoy the podcast and believe that you would enjoy my work in the book to help with the launch process. And I'm going to have 3 different ways to do that. And I'm going to be sending out information on that. So what I've done is put together a link where you can sign up. There's no obligation. You're just basically signing up for the information and to show interest in being a part of the book launch, which I would love you to do. I need all of the eyes on this book as I can conceivably get, and I do need your help. So it would be much appreciated. And there will be 3 ways that you can help, um, from more involved with number 1 all the way down to number 2, or excuse me, 3 being the least involvement. So you have 3 different ways that you can be a part of this. So the link will be in the show notes. You can sign up. You are not going to get inundated with any kind of spam, any kind of promotions. This is strictly for the book launch. So don't worry about that. If you're a person that guards your email, I get it. I get it. I just went through and cleaned mine. It was horrific. I think I had 500 emails in my box and most of them unread and most of them junk. So I get it. But I would love to have your help. So thank you so much. If you have not done so, please do follow the podcast because that way you don't miss an episode and you help me. You help push this up in the ranks. And I received some news from a friend who actually had checked out my podcast. It's doing quite well in Canada. It's doing well in Japan, of all places. Thank you to my son who's stationed in Japan, and doing relatively well in the US and Australia. And so and South Africa, isn't that funny? It's really well in South Africa. So I want to get that reach. I want to reach as many women as possible. So that really does help me. So thank you so much. And as always, wherever you are in the world, I wish you every blessing. Bye bye.